everybody. My name is Heidi Drury, and I want to welcome you into today's Lunch and Learn. Grab your lunch, your drink, your soda, your iced tea if you're here in Texas. We love that, sweet tea here. And join us for a conversation about how to stay connected through communication. First of all, I'd like to welcome you those online. We have 15 states represented or more today, people from Texas, from California. We have some friends in Florida and some close friends over in Arkansas as well. So thank you guys for taking your time out. And of course, I can't forget to say thank you so much for the people, our VIPs here in studio with us today. They're here to enjoy some conversations as well about communication. So if you haven't been with us the past 2 sessions, we have already been talking about communication. But what we want to do is finish strong and talk about how do you create connection with people using that communication that we've already talked about. So if you guys are ready, let's jump on in. And we're going to review first what we talked about the last few sessions in case you hadn't been with us. So the first thing we want to talk about is there are just some basic things that you need to know about communication. And one of those is that we show up communicating based on 4 things. One of those things might be, what did you learn in your family of origin? We all come to relationships later in life, either at work or with our spouse, our friends, and our family, learning how to communicate from the time we are young. So that's part of why and how we communicate. Guess what? You're also each uniquely wired. I'm an extrovert, which means I communicate outwardly. That's how I process. My husband, on the other hand, he's an introvert. He likes to communicate inside first before sharing. So you can imagine that is another difference to think about. Well, what about those other things, like being a man or a woman? Maybe this doesn't shock you, but us women tend to speak, 20,000 words to the average man, 7,000 words. And I like to joke around here, that's probably double for me. So those are some differences coming into that. And then guess what? Our past relationships in our own personal life, if we've had ex-spouses, friends that we've been with, or even relationships at our past jobs, influence how we communicate. So those are just some things to think about moving forward. And guess what? I want to talk also about what are the 3 ways that we do communicate? How does that come across? Well, you might be shocked to know that only 10% of what we communicate is actually the verbal words that come out of our mouth. 40% of that is tone. So how you sound when your words come out are very important to the person hearing those words. And then body language is 50% of how we communicate. So can you imagine if with your employees, your coworkers, your friends and family, if you're sending a text or an email, and only 10% of that is brought by words, we can see how trouble can arise if they can't see our body language or hear our tone. One of the things I like to say is, please do not impart super important relational information via that text or email because, that might not work out so well for you. So that's just something to think about. I also talked about the last time the levels of communication. There's 3 different levels that we share when we're communicating. The first thing is just facts. This happened. My shirt is salmon color. My jeans are blue. Those are facts. They're not open for interpretation, right? No vulnerability whatsoever included in those facts. It's just, we all can agree on that. Well, unless you're colorblind, right? The other thing, we start to get a little bit more vulnerable when we share our opinions and our ideas. Those could be based on facts, but we have some, a little bit more heart in there because we have to be vulnerable to share what we believe about something that might be a fact. Then the most vulnerable in communication is when we're actually showing our heart. We are getting down to kind of underneath the surface and we're being completely transparent and vulnerable with those people that we're working with, that we're seeing in our daily lives, and especially our family and friends. So those are kind of the different levels. We don't have to live in the vulnerable all the time. We can kind of go back and forth, right? And again, if we look at what was exposed to you in childhood, maybe you learned not to be vulnerable at all, or you learned to be very vulnerable. So you can see in the work environment and in our relationships, if we come from 2 different environments, it's really hard to understand why someone is always sharing facts versus someone who's always sharing their heart. And again, guess what? We go up to those different personality traits and how someone was made that also determines how they share that stuff. Now let's go and review why unhealthy communication might happen. We talked about this at our last session, but we like to say here at XO Marriage that your beliefs, what you're believing about anything, an event or a happening, dictates how you feel, and then your feelings actually dictate how you show up. So if I believe my employee is my enemy and I don't like the way they're, showing up, maybe I have a feeling about that, and that feeling will dictate how I treat them. No more is that true than in our relationships. So again, if my husband walks through the door and he slams the door and I choose to believe something about why he slammed the door, maybe I become afraid of that. And then how do I respond? By either withdrawing or pursuing. So again, we have to learn to not just assume what those people in our lives are doing, right? Especially if we think about communication, it being 40% the tone and that 50% body language, it's always better to ask. So our beliefs drive everything. Our feelings are important. And you guys, I like to say they're indicators, like on the dash light of your car. God gave us those to understand what's going on inside of us. He's just pretty clear. We're not to make deciding factors based on how we're feeling, but really what's on the truth, right? And so we just want to make sure we understand that. One of the most important ways we can have a belief about the people that we communicate with is covenant or contract. And as a Christian, we believe that that's that agape love covenant, right? And that doesn't have to just stop with your relationship with your spouse. Covenant says, we are a team, you're my friend, we're in this together. It's kind of we language. And contract, on the other hand, is like, nope, it's all about me. How is this affecting me? Maybe even you're my enemy. And that can be across lots of different relationships. So work relationships, school relationships, employee boss, all of those, but especially obviously your relationship with your spouse or the person that you're engaged with or in a long-term relationship with. So again, let's also think, what do I believe about conflict or communication? If I go back to how I was introduced to communicating or conflict in my childhood, what if I avoid conflict because I don't like it? I might withdraw or just say, nope, this isn't for me, and I go away. We call those people like conflict avoidant, right? And so they're probably not going to communicate too well about conflict and how they're feeling. And then the other side of that is, what if I also don't like conflict, but I get very anxious when there's conflict, so I pursue the other person. At work or my spouse, I chase them down to get it over with because I don't like it. And guess what I might do is compromise or say or do things just to get that conflict over with. So that can cause not good communication. It can cause conflict in a relationship if those are some of those things that we come with. One of the things we like to say here at XO Marriage is, do you have a positive or a negative lens when you're in communication or conflict? The negative lens is holding up the magnifying glass, looking at the person on the other end, whether a coworker, an employee, a friend, or a family member, or a spouse, and we're looking through that magnifying glass and we're like, your fault, you did this. We're labeling their behavior and assuming what they mean by it. So it's negative, it's not good. We're just filling in our own narrative, deciding why they're doing what they're doing. But what we really need to be doing is saying, wait, let me give somebody the benefit of the doubt and look more of a positive lens. Communicate what we're understanding and have questions on. But also that when we look through a positive lens, we're holding up a mirror and deciding, how is it affecting me, the communication, the relationship, right? God always wants us to start with us first and decide, wait, why am I reacting this way? Why am I believing what I'm believing? And how is that affecting my relationships? So last time we just kind of ended by saying one of the best ways to ward off conflict is, first of all, slow it down. Whenever you're in a communication situation with someone at work or in your family or friends, the enemy likes to speed things up because that's when we can assume more and go to that contract side of thinking. But what we really need to do is slow it down because it brings our heart rate down. It allows us to actually want to hear the other person, not to fix or to shame or blame, but to understand. So in the back of your mind, always going forward, think about, what is this person saying and how can I understand their heart? Don't let me label what I see on the outside, but let me understand their heart and to be curious. That's one of my favorite things that we do in our marriage. And even with employees is like, wait, I want to be curious about why they're saying what they're saying and what they're doing, It's the best way to kind of get rid of that negative lens. All right. So let's now talk about how do we keep constant connection with our spouses, our friends, and our family. We do that by communicating, right? And that's one of the best ways that we can stay connected. But we have some things that we want to talk about, specific ways to do that. So the first thing we have to understand that is relationships are an investment. We can't just say, oh yeah, I know someone. I mean, you have casual conversations with people and, you don't have deep, meaningful conversations with everybody. But the people in our lives, either our employees, our friends, and our family, and especially our spouses, it takes time. It takes energy, it takes a good attitude or a positive attitude, and they all take sacrifice. I'd like to take a little side note here and talk about sacrifice. A lot of us have believed over the years that in a relationship, we have to learn how to compromise. I actually don't like that word compromise. When we think about compromising, there's a winner and a loser, and there shouldn't be a winner and a loser in a relationship. There should always be a win-win, even if you're employee-employer, friends to friend, spouse to spouse. So that is a position of my heart. If I feel like I'm compromising, let's say my husband and I decide that we're going to date and it's going to be Wednesday nights. Well, that doesn't really work for me, and I compromise and say, fine, let's do Wednesday nights. What do you think I'm going to believe every time I show up to Wednesday night? Yuck, I had to compromise. I don't like it. How am I going to feel going into that date night? And then how will I show up? Whereas if I change the position of my heart and sacrifice for the person I'm in this relationship with, that is a way different thing. You know what? I'm going to sacrifice the date of the week I wanted to have the date, and we're going to do it on Wednesday and see how that works. And sure, we might renegotiate, but I want you to think that sacrifice has a different belief than actually if I'm compromising. So I just had to throw that in there because I think that's really important. All right. Those things that I just talked about, time, energy, sacrifice, and an attitude, well, those take time to learn how to do in each new relationship we have. Think about it. If we go back to what did you learn in your childhood, you might not be very good at those things because you never learned how. Well, that's definitely going to affect how you communicate with your loved ones. But really, think about it. If you start a job and you're the new person, it takes time to learn, oh, how does this person come up with communication? Are they an extrovert or introvert? It's really finding those little nuances. So all of these relationships, whether it's at your home, your office, your parents, well, you probably have, you have practice with your parents, but new friends, all of that stuff, it takes time to kind of think about how is this going to work? It's fluid. So you have to give yourself grace when you're learning new relationships, right? And each of those will look different. Time, energy, sacrifice, attitude. I have a little bit different time and energy and attitude at work than I do with my husband, and those things are different from my mom or my friends. We need all of those, but at different degrees. So, you aren't going to give, well, hopefully you're not giving your work family the best. You're giving that for your family at home, but they need some good stuff from you too. It can't just, be one-sided. So that's kind of something to think about. All right, so some important reasons why we need to invest in healthy communication and to foster communication. So what would those things be? Well, the first thing is it creates honor with each other. The best way to honor each other is with our words, with our time, our energy, and our sacrifice that we just talked about. The other thing is it helps me to understand people at a deeper level. Sure, I'm not going to probably go as deep with people at work as I would, a really close friend and obviously my spouse, but a way to be for each other is to know more about a person's heart. And the only way we can do that is by communicating and having healthy communication, right? It makes the other person feel like they matter, right? If you're at work or in a business relationship, if you're listening to me and I'm listening to you and I'm spending time and energy, I feel like I'm an important part of the team. No more true than in your marriage, right? So we have to make time for that. The other thing is it helps us get on the same page. How do we know if we're moving in the same direction, either in business or in our relationship? How do we even know we're going in the same direction if we're not communicating about it, right? We're not creating that connection. And my favorite one is it helps to limit frustrations. If I'm not telling you something, then I'm kind of internalizing it. And one of my favorite sayings that I got from Scott Martindale out of Blended Kingdom Family is an uncommunicated expectation is a premeditated conflict or resentment. If I'm keeping it down, it's going to come out somehow. Feelings don't just dissipate. They collect and they find their way out of the cracks. And sometimes those feelings and communication comes out sideways if we're pushing it down. Now, maybe you need help learning how to do that because you didn't learn. XO Marriage here at the Institute, we have great tools for you guys to learn how to do that. But it's very important to not, keep those things down. I also like to say talking and communicating you guys actually saves time. Well, how is that possible? Well, being proactive. And that's kind of the theme of what I'm going to finish up on the rest of this conversation, is that when we're proactive, we're talking about expectations, hopes, desires, our needs, and our wants beforehand. So we're negotiating those things. And sure, it might not always work out the way we want, but it always takes less time and energy than what I like to say is being reactive to a situation, or worse yet, when it gets radioactive. So if something gets radioactive, you're playing catch up. And usually there's hurt feelings involved, right? And there's things that have said and been done that really might make it hard to repair some of those things. So trust me, being proactive is always better. At first, when you learn to do that, it seems like it is taking more time, but the more you become comfortable with being proactive, I have found in my own relationship, as well as at work, that it does save time in the long run. Okay, so how do we do all of this? Well, there's 3 sections I'm going to talk about really how do we keep that connection through our conversations. And the first one is it has to be consistent and regular. Again, proactive versus reactive. So the first consistent one is let's talk about daily. What kind of conversations can we have daily with the people we work with, the people we're in love with, our family, and our friends? 10 or 15 minutes. It's just a check-in to get the temperature of the people that we are communicating with and want to have that relationship with. I like to say it's like the pulse, right? You're taking the pulse of the people that are in your immediate life. And this works not just at home, but it's really important in a work environment to make sure everybody, again, is on the same page. Now, of course, I think it's important that the whole team, obviously, if you have leadership, they can kind of set the pace for this, but why not get everybody's input? When is a good day to do this? How does it look? What are the kind of things we're going to talk about in these 10 or 15-minute daily checkups? Now, obviously, not all businesses can offer time to do that, but as much as you can, even if it's just by email, of course, we don't want to do that as much as in person. But this is where we're just sharing the facts about the day. We're sharing the facts about the season that we're in as a business or in a relationship. So here's some examples that I have for you guys. As Christians, one of the most important daily things we believe you can do here at XO Marriage is pray with your spouse. You can even pray with your team. A very scary statistic is in Christian couples, 1 out of 3 Christian couples who do not pray together on a regular basis will end in divorce. If you're praying on a regular basis, and we say that's 4 times a week, not just over meals, and listen, life happens, we all get busy, but if we're not using that time to pray, it gives, that's when things start to creep in. But if you pray together, you have 1,000% chance of not getting divorced just by praying together. So that's very important for us here at XO Marriage. All right, what else are we going to talk about? The workflow day. That's important as a team, but also as a married couple. For years, my husband and I have been small business owners, and we've worked together. So it's very important that we talk about our workflow, our work day. You might have expectations for your team about what that should look like. You need their input about what's going on in their lives. So it's very important to include that. I like to say comings and goings. Well, obviously, if you own a business, you have to know when your employees are clocking in and clocking out. Some businesses are a little bit more lax on that. You can kind of come in and leave as you need to. Some, you have appointments that you have to stick to. So it's really important to kind of know that. Well, in marriages, we have found communicating about this is very important. And if we look at comings and goings, that can be very tension-filled in a marriage, especially if you have a history of comings and goings in your early childhood that were not settling. You can actually transfer that anxiety to your spouse and have that same kind of thing. So if you notice that comings and goings are very anxious for you, or you withdraw, it's something to look into. Talk to your spouse about, like, how can we make this pleasant for both of us? If we go back to the story about extrovert, introvert, my husband would walk through that door and the words would just, hit him like a ton of bricks, because I was with kids all day or looking at the books, and I wanted another human to interact with, being a woman and an extrovert. And he was like, whoa, never mind. I'm going to turn around and go out and mow the field, because he didn't want to be hit that way. So for us, we had to decide, how does it work best for the marriage to come and go? That's the same thing in your business relationships. You want to make sure it works for everybody, right? The other thing, what's for lunch and dinner? It might not be so important at a work environment, but we all know at home, who's cooking and all that kind of good stuff can be something that really imparts daily facts, and a small change can really mess up your day. Well, at least mine. Who's picking up or dropping off the kids? These are important things you have to talk about. What about chores? Events, deadlines, especially in the work environment, what deadlines do we have as a team, right? We can't just assume that everybody knows what those deadlines are. And depending if you have departments at your business, those might be different depending on the department. So it's really important to have those daily conversations. So how can we ask? What are some questions that you guys can ask? Here's a few that I wrote down, and you can write these down if you'd like. The first thing is, how is your day going? And if you have somebody on the other end of that question that's not very good at finding words, you can provide a word list for them. I love giving a word list for children, for employees, because again, if you grew up not learning how to label what you're feeling and what you're believing, having that list in front of them, choose 3 words off that list and tell me how you're doing today. And so you're asking, is it good? Is your day hard? Is there anything you need me to help you with? Again, this works across work environment or whatnot. One of the best things that's ever happened in my marriage is when my husband learned to say, what do you need from me right now? Because what he's doing there is showing that he can take care of me. He can help me in those times when maybe I'm not 100%. That's great for the work environment too. What do you need from me right now? If you're doing those daily check-ins with your employees, that is good for them. And those, what do you need from me right now? Think about those areas: mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Some of those don't cross over so good into the work environment, depending on what kind of business you run. But those are, like we like to say, the 4 tires on the emotion, on your relationship car. So make sure you're checking all 4 of those tires. Okay, so that's daily. And again, you guys have grace for yourself. We don't always have time to check in, I think, but set a goal for yourself. 4 days, 3 to 4 days a week, we should be having something like that. All right, the next one is weekly. I like to say minimum 30 minutes, but upwards of what? Well, it depends on what season of life you're in. My husband and I are blessed to be in the empty nester season. We have no plants, no animals, no children, no dogs, no nothing at home. So our weekly check-in looks way different than someone who has a newborn child, a toddler, or, the teenager going to 22 different sports activities, right? So it looks different weekly. And again, you guys need to be deciding this together. Nobody should be dominant over the other person and demanding when you meet. It's got to work out for both of you. So when, where, how long, and what topics? Again, please be deciding these things together. But here's some ideas that we come up with here at XO Marriage for weekly check-in. The first we call date night or friendship time. And one of our directors here, Brandon, calls that couch time. So think about couch time. If we go to that title, friendship, probably shouldn't be talking about conflict there or trying to fix things in the relationship. This is just fun and pursuing each other. And you can actually do this in the work environment too. Once a week, are you having team meetings where maybe you're just having lunch or you're going out for a fun event? It doesn't always have to be work. It's the best way to build the team and get together. Now, on the other side of that, we do need to be scheduling conflict. Conflict does happen on its own, but we also don't want to wait for conflict to happen to be resolving things, right? I go back to that proactive versus reactive, because again, if we're used to shoving things under the rug, think about the rug. If it's like, the old-fashioned vacuum cleaners that have all that dust in there, it goes nowhere, and you step on it accidentally, it's coming out everywhere. So that's the same thing about conflict. It doesn't go away, it accumulates, and it stays there until you deal with it. And if you don't know how to deal with conflict, that's what we do really good here at the EXO Institute. We have lots of courses, and we have marriage services here to help you do that. It's very important to learn how to resolve conflict in a way that's healthy. We like to say here that actually conflict is not bad. It's how you're doing conflict that might be bad, right? And so we have to learn how to do it in a way that is honoring to everybody in the relationship. Okay, family, staff, or team meetings. It's important weekly, especially depending on the age of your children, if they know the comings and goings too. You can't just, the morning of, a lot of children get anxiety because there's so much going on. We want to include them in some sort of family meeting where they're able to voice their heart as well about what's working or not working for them. It doesn't mean they get to say how it changes, but why wouldn't we want to hear their heart? Maybe we're parenting in a way that doesn't really sit well with them in terms of their scheduling. Maybe there's just some things going on at school you want to talk about. We can talk about finances in this weekly meeting, weekly logistics. Again, being proactive about the week coming up. If it's busy and you won't have time for that daily check-in, that's great for everybody. So here's the questions you can ask during that weekly time. Again, this can be for your team at work. It can be for your spouse, friends, or even your children. So how are you doing in your role? So if you're a mother, you'd say, how are you doing in your role as a mother? That's what my husband might ask. Or ask your children, how are you doing in your role as a student? Maybe there's some struggles at work. Or if you're the boss, how's it going at work for you? And hopefully, if you're a boss, you have a mentor that is asking you those questions, right? It's very important to do that. Here's another one. How am I doing in honoring, loving, and supporting you? We all have a love language or a way we want to be served, even in the workplace. And so obviously you're conforming at the workplace, but if it's not how you're suited, it's going to be really like trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. And it's okay to tell someone, that's not working for me. I like to communicate this way. I like to be in a relationship this way. You're just asking for needs to be met, right? In a way that you want to. We tend to serve our spouse, our employees, in the way that we like to get served. And that doesn't do anybody any good unless you have the same love language or whatnot. For me, one of my top strengths is learning. So I really love the people around me by telling them all these amazing, useless facts that I have stored up here in my head. That's just how I do it. For my husband, he does by fixing, and other people by being empathy and sitting down and listening. So again, we want to serve those people the way that's best for them. You could also ask, what are you anxious about? What are you excited about? Is there something coming up that, you want to know about? We like to say, ask about victories and challenges. Those are the two words that we always ask, especially when I'm coaching. I said, okay, let's talk about those. And we always start with victories because we always want to start with the positive. So what are the victories we've had this week? What are the challenges you've had this week? So those are ways to kind of frame it for the people that you're talking to. Okay, so now we have quarterly or yearly. And this is going to look, again, different depending on what season you're in and especially how your business is set up. So maybe you do this once a month. I mean, we have these great lunch and learns. The one that you're coming to, that's a great way to plug in monthly for training. Or maybe you can only fit it in quarterly, but at least once a year, you're doing a bigger kind of getaway where you are getting away with no distractions. We're talking no children, no animals. It's just away from the office. I like to say it's away from your home because it's a neutral place. If I try to have a yearly event in my house and my husband and I are trying to connect on a deeper level, I look over and I see the pile of laundry. I see my calendar in the background. And that can be the same thing at your office. Getting people outside of the office to have a yearly event is really great. And so some of those things again, we're just making sure that we're all flowing in the same direction, right? And so a vision is very important. And to do this yearly, if you're a business, you have to have a vision statement. But also in relationships, we need to have a vision statement. How do we know where we're going? Who are we? What are we about? What is at the core of our business or our relationship? And then the mission is, how am I going to walk that out? So every aspect of our relationship at work or with my spouse is, here's our vision. How am I going to work that out with finances, with our children, communicating, vacations? All of those things stem from what we believe is our goal in our marriage. Well, a business definitely has to have a mission and a vision, or else, like the Bible says, how do you know where you're going? And you will perish because you don't have a plan. And so that's important in all of our relationships. So what are some examples? Retreats. And that's great for not just the marriage, but it's important to do that as a work environment too. Workshops like we're doing right here. Conferences, I already said lunch and learns. Classes or continuing education. Books are really a great way to do that too, or podcasts. Maybe you have a podcast that you want to tell all of your employees to listen to. That's a great thing. EXO Institute has some great podcasts, so you can always check those out. Maybe there is some counseling or coaching. Again, proactive is always better for relationships, and even work relationships might need coaching and mentoring. There's no shame in saying you don't know how to do something. I actually think if you don't ask, it's worse. We're all human, we're all weak in certain areas, and if we're communicating that to everybody, that's the best way to grow emotionally, physically, mentally, and spiritually. All right, so let's talk about a few little last-minute things, and then we will open it up for Q&A. So in all of these things that I've talked about, we're not waiting for crisis. Now, obviously, things happen, and crisis can happen, and you can take care of it at that moment. But we tend to make those compromises more if we're in crisis mentality in our own personal relationships, but especially at work. The ship is probably sinking if we're waiting to deal with things when it's in crisis, right? Let's be flexible too. All of these things that I've talked about, the daily, the weekly, the monthly, quarterly, we have to be flexible. Now, this is coming from someone who loves a schedule and loves to stick to a schedule. So this is an area of growth for me. I'm married to someone who can change on the spot. So you can imagine we've had to learn how to be flexible, that not being so rigid about that, well, we're doing it today, but being able to be flexible if something happens both in the workplace or your relationship. Now, having said that, it's very important to also schedule those things. If you don't put them on the schedule, and listen, I'm going to say marital scheduling, it's not super sexy, but guess what? It gets it done, and make sure it happens, because we have to be intentional in our relationships. We can't just wait for things to happen. I mean, have you ever sat back, opened up a business, put your feet up and said, okay, let's make it work? It doesn't work that way, and relationships are the same. Whether they're in the workforce, friends and family, you have to be always pursuing that. So communication is one of the ways that we do that. I also have down here that you need to change all of these things. Sometimes the daily conversations, minor changes can really affect how you show up in a relationship. Being able to communicate minor changes are very important. So in your business, here at EXO, we have the Slack channel. It might be texting or emailing or a message board, whatever it is. Small changes can really affect your team. So you need to be able to have a way to communicate that. And then obviously major life changes, you guys can affect all of these channels of communication. So we have to make sure we're staying up on top of it. These are all ways for you guys to have healthy communication and create that connection that we all crave. God created us for connection, and we need connection in relationships. And the best way to do that is through our communication and to be working on having healthy ways to do that. All right, you guys. So now we are going to open it up to questions from either our audience or anybody here VIP. Have any questions? Our audience member was asking, how in the workplace do you approach someone who might be maybe conflict avoidant or fearful of getting approached and might be taking that the wrong way. One of the best tools that we use here at XO is I don't care what you have, but having a prop that's like a heart. You can get a squishy heart, and having a space in your office that might be set aside and not out in the open so that they don't feel like everybody's eyes are on them. And so having a prop that you can say, hey, I really want to hear your heart about this, and letting them sit and hold the heart while they share is a good way to teach them that you're not going to respond to be shameful or blaming. But maybe you have some sort of anonymous communication. I know not everything can be communicated that way, but if they're the ones with something that's struggling to communicate to you, you could have an anonymous box or a journal that they just write questions, and once a day or a week, you can go by and answer those and they can see those there. I think it just takes time to teach them that you're in that covenant. We are a team, using a lot of us and we language, that it's not me and, you're saying I, or me. It's we in this team. And then if they need help, having a list of resources for those people that really are struggling with communication, having a coach for them, an outside resource like XO or another counseling service, it's always great to have a list of those things. Does that make sense? Okay. So another question we often get is, well, what about these yearly events? What do I do with my kids? Do we bring them with us? Absolutely not. You need to make sure that either in the business or in your married life, you are taking the time just for the two of you. And my husband and I, we call it a vision retreat, and I'll talk more about that because we're having a couple coming up here at XO. But we go away once a year, and we start in October by making our separate lists of things we want to communicate about. Now, we're pretty good about communicating all year long, but there's just big things that we want to pray about and talk about. And he'll start like, well, we need a new roof. We need this, all the man things that he does at home and all the things that I want to talk about. We have 8 grandchildren now, so for me, it's usually how much I want to spend on the grandbabies for gifts and whatnot. And we just kind of start putting those things and our heart's desires on that list in about October. And then in December, we spend 2 or 3 days away from everybody else in a place that we've chosen. And here's the caveat. You want to make sure you go somewhere fun, but not too fun, because if you go somewhere too fun, you don't get to those things on the list. So we tend to take one thing at a time and talk about finances. We'll talk about it, pray about it. Our conversation is, if we're in agreement, we check it off the list. And then we just go have fun for a couple hours, and we come back and we then talk about, the grandbabies and how much we're spending for gifts. All of these things are so that we're proactive, because we spend 2 or 3 days discussing things that might all year long kind of bubble up in our relationship and cause problems. So again, proactive, better than reactive, or worse yet, radioactive. So no, we don't want children with us. And if you're in the newlywed stage, or you have an infant or a newborn, I'm sure there's somebody at church or a family member, even if it's just a few hours and you go and talk about one topic, 2 hours at a time, that's better than not getting away. And if you can't afford to get on a cruise, or you can't afford to go to the beach or travel far away, go to a cheap hotel down the block or a couple miles away, so that at least you're not in that same spot where all the distractions are. We like to say it's kind of like leaving that away. So yeah, it's really important that you take that time away from yourself. No children, no dogs. I like to say that. Oh, we have a question coming in. We're going to wait. Macy's going to repeat that in just a second.
What are some example ways, activities, check-ins, etc., to connect with coworkers in a healthy way? For example, myself being a married woman who works in a male-dominated field, I want to be careful not to be misunderstood. My intent for connection is only to build a better work environment, nothing else.
That's a great question. Thank you so much for that. I think the first thing is that has to come from the top down, and you have to have procedures in place that protect everybody in the work environment. And as a woman, I'm going to address her specifically. It can be across the board. But as a woman, I think one of the things I do is, first of all, I check with my husband and see what he's comfortable with. We have boundaries in our marriage that supersede any boundary at work. So I will do what my husband is requiring me to do at the workplace. So that's always good to check with your spouse if you have one. What do you feel comfortable with? As a woman, it's probably always best if you're not behind closed doors in an office with a man by yourself. You can have here at EXO, we have glass. So even though the door might close, you can always see what's going on. Telling somebody you're going into a meeting, including a third party if you can. Including a mail on an email or a text thread is always a safe way to do that. Again, especially if you're a woman in the workplace in a leadership position, we all know, unfortunately, that not everybody has true intentions. So it's also protecting yourself from somebody saying something or lying about you. So again, I think to answer that, I would always start with my spouse first, see what they're comfortable with, and then present to your employers or your management, like, this is what's important in my relationship. How can we make this work as a team? Don't assume. Don't just have an expectation without communicating that. You would be very surprised. In the workforce this day, everybody is really good about making sure everybody's comfortable.
Another one from Rochelle. What do you do when you're different personalities, introverted versus extroverted? How do you resist the drift in marriage?
Absolutely. So this is a perfect example. It's a marriage question that happened in my marriage. My husband, like I said, is an introvert. He processes internally, and I process externally. What we had to do is find a way that worked for both of us. We call that having a win-win. The marriage is not just my husband, and it's not just me. It's both of us working together as one flesh. So for me to demand that I talk until 10 o'clock at night is not fair to the marriage. For Kenny to shut down and not share is not fair for the marriage. So we have to decide what works for both of us. And so what we did is we have created a code word that when Kenny feels like he's shutting down, he'll say the code word. And that's a good thing for me, not to take it personally. He just can't take any more information in. And so that's worked for us. But we also negotiate in those weekly meetings based on what's going on in the schedule. What days work good for Kenny to talk? What days don't work for him? When do I need to be able to be free to do that? And so we're negotiating on a weekly basis the time and the day that we really spend time doing that. Now, again, women also have a special need to have that open communication. But again, in our family, it wasn't the minute Kenny got home, hitting him at the door. For us, it worked to decide between dinner and after, so between 4 and 6 worked great for us for a season. Again, negotiate what's best for your spouse. Well, what I can do is talk to you guys in case something does come in the meantime is a little bit more about the EXO Institute and what we do here and how communication can be worked on here and the stuff that we do. Well, first of all, we have always ongoing marriage services. So if your marriage is in an okay place or a not so okay place, we have a wide range of services to help with doing that. So we have crisis calls and marriage intensives. And so Macy is signaling that we have a call, so I'll go back to that in a minute, or a question. Go ahead, Macy.
What is the best way for me to learn to transition between all of the different communication styles, especially working with younger staff or the variety of ages and ways of thinking and communicating?
I think the best way is if you have the ability to have multi-generations on your management or in your office and not being afraid to approach people who might be not part of management, asking them, how do you best communicate? I communicate so differently than a lot of the people here because they are of a younger generation. Slack and text, all that stuff is secondhand to them. I'm a go and speak to you kind of person. Well, no shock, because I'm an extrovert also. But for me, that's just how I learned how to communicate in the business place. And again, being self-employed, I only had to answer to my husband, so we could always talk about it. So it's really just, researching, see what works for people. Ask everybody to be part of that conversation. Now, if cost is a factor, you can, consider that when you're making decisions on the best way to generationally kind of communicate, but the Bible's pretty clear. We're to be multi-generational, not just in the church, but in our work environments, in our family lives. Everybody, all of us have something to contribute. So the younger people need to learn about from the older generation. The older generation needs to understand the younger generation. And it's just research. I mean, we all love those research bars that you can just put in there and find all those great, amazing apps and things to do to find out what works best for your team. And you'd be surprised, the younger kids have some amazing stuff, you guys. We just have to not be afraid to use them, right? Well, we have to allow the Holy Spirit the room to do what only the Holy Spirit can do. So what I would suggest from you is impart to your husband how important it is for you. Number one, a woman, one of her mega needs is to have a husband who is spiritually a leader in the family. It's in our DNA. And there's some great resources on EXO to talk about that, articles or whatnot. It's also biblical. If your husband's not ready to do that, couple things, and I'm not saying this isn't the case in your house, but does he feel comfortable praying? Have you made it comfortable for him to pray no matter what it sounds like? In my marriage, my husband had a belief that it didn't sound right coming out. Whoops. So he wouldn't do that, right? He was kind of quiet about it. But then when I said to him, it's really important, my heart, I want to hear whatever your heart says in prayer, so I want to pray together. And then the last thing to do, it's important for you to go to the Holy Spirit and the Lord and pray that he becomes more comfortable. Allow room for God to do that. Your husband probably already, if he knows you want to pray and you've communicated that, then allow him the room, the Holy Spirit the room, to convict his heart and be the one to lead him to do that. All right, let's talk more about what we do at EXO Institute. So I already talked about the marriage services. If you're having troubles communicating and you feel distance and your relationships aren't feeling like you're connecting and you're speaking English and your husband is not speaking English and hearing you and it's just going haywire, those marriage services are a great way to plug in. We have crisis calls, we have coaching calls, and our specialty is the marriage intensive, where we spend a full 1 or 2 days with you unpacking all of that. And so you can look at exoinstitute.com to find out more about that. Then what do you want to do if you are somebody out there that isn't just super passionate about helping marriages? We have a training here called the Mediation Certification Training, where if you want to be part of our mission to help lower the divorce rate, increase the marriage rate, and make sure children are being raised in two-parent families, then we have a training for you. We have one left in November that has some space in it, and then again in April of 2026. So you can find out more information at exoinstitute.com for that. And then let me talk about some of those things and events that we have here that are great on site. Obviously, we have this Lunch and Learn. We'll have another one in August where we'll be talking about addiction and how that affects communication. We have nighttime events as well. Eric Kennedy from Recovery Vow is going to be in here talking about addictions as well. Then we have this amazing thing called the Vision Retreat. I was kind of alluding to that, how I do it in my own marriage. But in October, November, we're going to have it where you can come and in the EXO building, find out what that looks like, create a vision statement and a mission for your marriage, and then learn how to implement those walking out in person. And so those dates, I don't want to get them wrong, so let me give them to you. October 10th and 11th. And we'll have another one November 7th and 8th. And then we have more on our website for 2026. We have premarital workshops. So if you're in the beginning portion of your relationship, we want to make sure you're equipped with how to do those things we just talked about today. And our next one is October 25th. And then in February, we have a great event coming up. We're going to be simulcasting. So we'll have some in-person available. But if you have a church body, look at exoinstitute.com to bring that to your church. We'll have lots of opportunities to learn more about communications. So another great resource for you guys out there or here to take back to your office or your workplace or your relationships is EXO Now. It's an app we have where we have a lot of digital content on there, including courses about communication. If you're having trouble with any sort of Stronghold, we have some great programs on there. The 21-day total inner healing and freedom journeys are great. Those are on there. And if you guys have any questions, you can email us at info@xomarriage.com. We'd be happy to answer any of those questions. I thank you guys so much for sharing your lunch with us today. I hope you enjoyed your sandwich at home. We've enjoyed ours here, and our communication talk today, and how you guys can use communication to foster a growing relationship.